السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. So continuing with our theme of the different sciences and the disciplines of the Quran, one of the great disciplines of the Quran, of course, is tafsir. So I thought that tonight we'll speak a little bit about tafsir. Now, of course, there are different types of tafsir, which is why this might be useful. But all of the tafsir have to have the same basic, or the people that do the tafsir have to have the basic same skill sets. They have to understand the structure of the Arabic language. And when we say the Arabic language are different disciplines within that. So there's the grammar, the nahu, there's the sarf, the syntax, and then there's rhetoric, logic, and inside al-balagha there are 3 sub-sciences. Those are the basic things that you need to know, because the Quran is revealed in the Arabic language. And I think maybe a couple nights ago we talked about some examples about, or maybe I didn't talk about this, but some verses we'll interpret them literally. Some verses we will interpret them figuratively. Well, how do you know? You know by the context of the verse. And they have to understand the different traditions, the different riwayat, narrations and traditions related to those verses of the Quran. And of course, they have to uphold the basic belief that we have, the basic points of aqidah, of belief that we have as Muslims. But that being said, there are different types of tafsir. So for those of you that want to further, your understanding of the Quran, maybe this will be useful. The first kind of tafsir, which is very easy for you to understand, is called a tafsir bil-ma'thur. It's the tafsir that's based on traditions. So these tafsir will gather all of the traditions and narrations about all of the verses. So you have something like a tafsir al-Tabari, you have something like tafsir ibn Kathir, you have something like tafsir of as-Suyuti, and many others. These are the tafsir bil-ma'thur. They'll gather all of the traditions, irrespective if the tradition is strong or weak, and irrespective if the tradition is Islamic or not. So in some of these tafsir, you'll have what you call Isra'iliyat, or non-Islamic sources, such as the traditions of the people of the book, especially when it relates to stories of the prophets, because many of the prophets in the Quran are the Hebrew prophets, alayhim salam. So that's one kind of tafsir. And if I'm not mistaken, I think tafsir of Ibn Kathir is translated into English. I think all of it's translated into English. And that's probably one of the most standard tafsir that you have. But Ibn Kathir, unlike a Tabari and unlike a Suyuti, he does stay away largely from the weaker types of traditions, which is why Salafi-minded people, they think it's like the greatest tafsir since sliced bread. That's not necessarily the case, but I just flagged that for you so you know. Then there's another type of tafsir, it's called tafsir bil-ra'i. Here a ra'i doesn't mean your own opinion, but it's basically an ijtihad-based tafsir. And this is that the mufassir's job is to look at the verses of the Quran largely using the Arabic language. So a lot of this type of tafsir is heavy on the Arabic language, and deducing meanings and rulings from the verses given the parameters of our interpretive tradition, our usul al-fiqh. So with the exception of the first one I'm going to mention, all of the ones I'm going to mention are Sunni sources, with the exception of the first one is the famous Az-Zamakhshari. Imam Az-Zamakhshari rahimahullah was a Mu'tazilite. He was a Hanafi, but he was Mu'tazilite in Aqidah, and he was also a master of the Arabic language. So his tafsir is a wonderful tafsir from the point of view of the linguistic analysis. You also have like the tafsir of Al-Razi, Imam Al-Razi, Fakhruddin, that's my favorite tafsir. That's my go-to tafsir. It doesn't have to be yours, I'm just saying it's my favorite tafsir. So Fakhruddin Al-Razi, he talks about everything and anything. He talks about aqidah, he talks about logic, he talks about fiqh, he talks about philosophy, he talks about tasawwuf, he talks about everything in his tafsir. It's like an encyclopedic tafsir. You also have something like the tafsir of Abu Sa'ud, who was the Shaykh al-Islam of the Ottoman Empire during Sulaiman al-Qanuni, Sulaiman the Magnificent's Khilafah. He was the Shaykh al-Islam. And this is considered like the highest point of Ottoman Islamic intellectual history. This is, the high Ottoman Islamic thought. And that tafsir, it was written in Arabic, and it's considered a standard tafsir. They teach it at Al-Azhar in the university, and it's found almost everywhere. And after him, a later tafsir is the tafsir of Al-Alusi, who was a famous Iraqi scholar. and Alusi, I think, is in the 13th Islamic century. Once we get to the 13th Islamic century, anything after that we consider the modern period. So all of the tafsir I'm mentioning to you are going to, Alusi will be the last one. These tafsirs that I just mentioned, what was the first one I mentioned? Al-Zamakhshari, Abu Saud, Al-Razi, Al-Alusi, these are considered ijtihad-based types of tafsir. We use Al-Razi on Sunday? Okay, good. Good to see, alhamdulillah. So these tafsir are encyclopedic. They tend to be longer, with the exception of a Zamakhshari, which is a short tafsir. But all of the ones I just mentioned are at least 12 volumes long, so they're longer, encyclopedic. If you want a tafsir of one verse, like in Al-Razi's tafsir, if you look up one verse, he's going to give you at least 8 to 10 pages on that verse alone. You know, he'll be like, وَفِيهِ مَسَائِل. And in this verse are many issues. Al-Mas'ala al-Ula, the first one, the second one, and he goes on and on and on. So it's very long-winded and encyclopedic. So this is a second type of tafsir, an ijtihad-based tafsir. A third type of tafsir that you find is a tafsir al-Ishari, or the Sufi tafsir. And this is that the mufassir takes the apparent verse of the Quran, after affirming the apparent verse, of course, then going to a deeper meaning of the Quran. So, like for example, the story of Talut and his people in Bani Israel, that he says, we're going to cross this river, and anyone who drinks from the river is not from me except the person that cups, one cup handful of water. Right? That's a story. But the Ishari tafsir will be like, yeah, but there's a deeper meaning into this. The river is like the dunya, and then taking from the dunya, you take a little bit of the dunya, not too much. So they will do a deeper analysis of the tafsir. Two famous types of tafsir like this are Tustari, which is translated into English. I think the whole thing is translated into English. And Al-Qushayri, who is the author of the famous Al-Risala Al-Qushayriya. He has also a very extensive tafsir, Ishari, which I don't think it's translated, but a new critical edition in Arabic has come out. I saw it this year. It's very beautiful. And also there's Ibn Ajiba. Ibn Ajiba was a famous Moroccan Sufi, also from the 13th Islamic century, if I'm not mistaken. And he has a tafsir al-Ishari, in which it's very systematic. He'll give you the outward tafsir of the verse, and then he'll give you the ishara, the inner meaning of the verse. I think Ibn Ajiba's tafsir is translated into English, or parts of it are translated into English. So that's a Sufi type of tafsir. There's another type of tafsir called a tafsir al-fiqhi, the fiqh-based tafsir. And these are tafsir that emerged around the 3rd Islamic century, or 4th Islamic century rather. And they were largely, as the schools of Islamic law were canonized, these tafsir emerged from those early fuqaha to explain the proof text of their madhab. So a tafsir like Al-Jassas's tafsir is very Hanafi leaning, and he gives proof of the Hanafi madhab in its understanding of certain rulings, ayat al-ahkam, verses of the rulings in the Quran. And then you have a later day Maliki mufassir like Al-Qurtubi. Al-Qurtubi was an Andalusian scholar who ended up living the rest of his life in Egypt. And he also has a fiqh-based tafsir in which he'll analyze the verses of the ahkam, and does it support the Maliki madhab, or maybe there's another reading. So that's another type of tafsir. And of course there are Shia tafsir as well. I didn't name much of those, but that's another genre of tafsir. Why is this important? Because if you want to bring the tafsir into your life and you want to understand the verses, you have to understand what the book is in front of you. Because if you get an encyclopedic tafsir like Al-Razi, which is being translated into English, you can be overwhelmed. It can be overwhelming reading Al-Razi because there's just so much that's going on. Sometimes you just want a quick dose of what does this verse mean. So you'll look at something like Ibn Kathir. That will explain to you, these are the basic traditions and stories, asbab and nuzul, etc., the things we've talked about the last 2 nights. He'll give you that, and then that's enough. But if you want something deeper, or if you want the hidden meaning, then you're going to go to the Sufi tafsir, so on and so forth. So most likely what ends up happening is you end up having 1 or 2 of each of these kinds on your shelf or online, or you have access to it, and you know what to look at to get what kind of piece of information that you're looking for. That being said, all of these are considered orthodox tafsir, with the exception of a Zamakhshari, because he was Mu'tazilite. He has a non-Sunni interpretation of some of the theological positions, but I mean that's so obtuse it won't even affect you, inshallah. But all of these mufassirun were qualified. They understood the Arabic language, they understood theology, they understood fiqh, they understood usul al-fiqh, and then therefore they were prepared to go to the text of the Quran and draw those types of meaning from it. And the fact that we have all of this plethora, and I'm just giving you examples, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of tafsir from all around the Muslim world. You get the flavor of the rich interpretive history of the Quran. Also what you learn is you learn how the ummah, in its geography, all of the parts of the ummah helped service the Quran. So we have a saying, we say the Quran was revealed in Mecca and Medina, and it was recited in Egypt, and it was written in Turkey or the Ottomans, and its tafsir was done in Al-Hind. أنزل في الحجاز وقرئ في مصر وكتب عند الأتراك وفسر في الهند. And the idea is that each part of the Muslim world did something, added something to the. Of course, this is just a statement. It doesn't mean it's these are silos. But the idea is, I mentioned to you an Iraqi scholar, an Ottoman scholar, an Andalusian scholar, a Khurasani scholar, a non-Sunni scholar, so on and so forth. This shows you the breadth of the Ummah's attempt in tafsir. Notice how I didn't talk about any modern tafsir. The modern tafsir, they tend to not be very good. That's just to be very polite, because we're in Ramadan. So if you want tafsir, my advice is look at the ones that I just mentioned, and then you can come. But these modern tafsir, scientific analysis of the Quran, that's, you're going to lose, right? Because your scientific analysis is only as sharp as your science is today. What happens if your theories change tomorrow? Then, so there's a epistemological problem with that type of tafsir. And then you have people that do tafsir based on social sciences, and that stuff doesn't really hold up muster, to be honest. They're just like if you squeeze a lemon in a pool and you say you have lemonade. That's the kind of tafsir it is. So I would stick with the tafsir that are up until the 13th Islamic century. That will give you a real good understanding of the verses. And I tried to mention to you the tafsir that are available in the English language. Of course, all of the tafsir I just mentioned are available in Arabic. And of course, for our Urdu-speaking brothers and sisters, I'm not well versed, I can't advise you, but I think, doesn't Ahmad Rida Khan have a tafsir in Urdu? Yeah? It's translated? But Ahmad Rida Khan has a tafsir in Urdu. Yes. Yeah. So anything that Ahmad Rida Khan has, I endorse. You're safe with anything that he writes, and his madrasa, and I think we have one of those tafsir in our library. And of course, there are Persian tafsir as well. The point is that in any language, in any Islamic language, and almost in any Western language, you will have today, alhamdulillah, enough tafsir for you to be able to go to. And an online, last thing I'll say, an online resource for you is altafsir.com, ALTAFSIR, altafsir.com. This is a website that's run by one of the organizations that I work with in Jordan, and it has the translation of the Quran in, I think, 60-something languages. And if you go to the English translation, you can see the drop-down list of all of the English translations and tafsir that have been translated for every single verse. So you can access that from your phone, from the browser, or you can go to the app Great Tafsir. It's an app called Great Tafsir, and you can access the same thing. So that's it for this portion. I'll pick it up after Imam Rifai's 3 days. By the way, I know that this is dry. One of you came up to me yesterday and said this is a dry, so I realize that this is a dry subject. If you guys think it's very dry, I'm very happy to switch, and we can talk about stories of the jinn and all of these things for the rest of Ramadan. So I'm going to give you 3 days to think if you want me to continue talking about the disciplines and sciences of the Quran, or you want me to switch to jinn and ghost stories and things like that. I'm happy to do that for the second half of the month. So you have 3 days to decide. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.